From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, episode number 436. Andrew with you once again. I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. My co-host and good friend is Derek. He is Deeper3 in the forum and Deeper384 on Twitter. Derek, good to be talking to you once again.
No, I'm happy to be here. The last episode of the NLSC Podcast that we uploaded to YouTube, I had brought up that I was really enjoying the NBA Inside Drive series and talked about the series a little bit and even recommended it to our listeners and whatnot. And Philly Catholic League Sports Network left a comment on the YouTube video, and he said, once again, Derek bringing a quality alternative to the forefront, this time NBA Inside Drive. And I appreciated that comment. However, you and I revisited Fox Sports Basketball 2000 the other night, and that is a game that is not of high quality. It is not a quality alternative, and that's not one that we are going to recommend all basketball gamers pick up.
No, that is one strictly for the collectors in the community, and also anybody who just likes oddities in their collection, I suppose, and likes to play a game that's... if the people who like the angry video game nerd and so forth and went out and got the bad games after seeing those videos and deciding, I want to play those horrible games too. It is not a great game by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of games came out in the 2000 season, for the 2000 season, I should say. NBA Live 2000 being the flagship, the gold standard, if you will. NBA 2K being that the new challenger on the horizon coming out there. NBA Jam 2000, which was an insult to the NBA Jam name, and then of course you have Fox Sports Basketball 2000, which is an insult to the to video game design in general. But man, what a rough game. But it's always fun to revisit those games with you, because even though we weren't mic'd up, I'm sure you were laughing just as I was.
So you were hosting via Parsec, and it worked really great on my end. You could tell, right? Like I was timing my shots, and I was making dribble moves, and everything made sense that I was doing on the floor, basically. But man, that game has possibly the worst rebounding mechanics, some of the worst passing mechanics, and some of the worst around the rim physics that I've possibly ever seen in a basketball video game. I mean, you do not jump for a rebound ever in that game, because there's no way they're going to grab it. You have to let it fall. You have to run to it. And it's 10 times worse than, NBA Live 2000, a game like NBA Live 2002, which has a similar problem. We were throwing passes, and I had to pause it and replay it several times when this happened. We were throwing passes where our guy was wide open and like 10 feet away from us, and the ball was flying over his head and going out of bounds, or the ball would warp and try to go to another player, and then it would go out of bounds. The game just almost feels poorly designed and unfinished. I think you could agree.
It reminds me a lot of International Basketball 2009 and Incredible Basketball, which is the same engine, of course, that we've talked about before. We've showed some footage of that, especially around the rim, just missing those easy shots around the rim. It's very familiar. The thing is that Fox Sports Basketball 2000, it came out in 1999 for the 2000 season, whereas International Basketball 2009 came out almost 10 years later in 2008. So it has less of an excuse. But either way, very poorly designed games, far behind the competition, to say the very least. And how about Jason Williams? Rim Rattler, Jason Williams.
Well, before I get to that, International Basketball 2009 has a little bit of an excuse, because it's a much smaller development team than what they had for Fox Sports Basketball 2000. Sure, they maybe had a better engine to work with to try to, make the graphics better and possibly even make the movement better. But I can guarantee you that it is a much smaller development team. I mean, for Fox Sports Basketball 2000, they had obviously Fox Sports that sponsored the game. They had the full NBA license. The game has some of the best presentation that I've seen, actually. I think you and I both agree that the presentation is good on that game. The music is what it was for the network. The portraits are unbelievably high quality for all of the players. The menus look outstanding, etc. Like, it's really good presentation-wise through the menus and everything. Just when you get on the floor, it just all falls apart. But yeah, Jason Williams was dunking like prime Vince Carter in Fox Sports Basketball 2000, in traffic, all these different types of jams, his head's at the rim and everything. And so there's not really any player differentiation in that game. I think you could agree. Like, I can use, Jason Williams like Vince Carter, and I can use Vince Carter like Jason Williams. And that's a red flag right there. I think where the game does do all right is the pace. I actually like the pace overall of the game, but it's not enough to save it because of all of the bugs and all the game sloppy game mechanics.
No, the pace is good. The presentation is fantastic. Obviously, it benefits from having that Fox Sports tie-in. It has Greg Papa and Doc Rivers on commentary. It's funny when you pause the game and the commentary just keeps running. It feels like they didn't know how to design a basketball game. And you did see that with some of the alternative basketball games for companies that didn't really make a lot of them. To that point, it was made by Radical Entertainment. I'm just looking at some of the other games that they developed. Mario is missing for the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES port of Mario is missing. They made a Beavis and Butthead game for Sega Genesis back in 1994. So they didn't make a lot of sports games or basketball games, really, and it shows.
How do you go from Mario is missing and Beavis and Butthead to Fox Sports Basketball 2000?
Their first game was The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends. So yeah, they've certainly been all over the map with that. It's not a great game. It was fun to play just for the hilarity of it. To be honest, you're right. There's no player differentiation. Jason Williams, I think, leads the league in scoring during season mode. So the sim engine isn't much better than the than the game engine. It's another one of those games that, because they don't have that experience making a great basketball game, that they don't have a great engine to build upon. You can see that they've tried to compensate with great presentation and the commentary and everything, but Just so many of the basics are poorly designed. Even that instant replay. Have you ever seen worse instant replay controls than Fox Sports NBA Basketball 2000?
It's so clunky. And there you tried to replay something, and you got so frustrated you were just like, screw it. And you exited the replay, the instant replay feature. I also want to point something out, and this is the reason why I bought it back in the day. Yes, people, I actually spent like quite a bit of time with Fox Sports Basketball 2000, back when it was a new title. The reason I bought it is because that's how we watch Celtics games in my area. That's the music, the network, the scoreboard, all of that stuff. That is like straight up early 2000s Celtics basketball for us, and late 90s basketball. So for us, it was like realistic at the time for that reason. And, I recognized some of those game mechanics in the past and they frustrated me back then. But I mean, they were even more frustrating when, you and I just recently revisited it. But I will say this, we still had fun, right? We got hosed at the end. Vlade Divac, I passed it to right underneath the hoop, and we were down by 2, 64-62. I think there was probably 7 seconds left or something like that. And through your great pass, you went up to dunk it, and out of nowhere, a defender, and I can't even remember who it was, took you out while you were in the air. You went flying and hit the floor. No foul call. I mean, obviously it was a flagrant in real life, but no foul call, and then the clock ran out. And we lost. But what's funny is that's the only moment that happened like that the entire game. Do you remember seeing a foul like that earlier on?
No, that's the thing. They screwed us over right at the end.
Right, exactly. I mean, I didn't even see a guy get pushed down like Divac did throughout the entire game. And then all of a sudden, in the last seconds, they allowed that to happen. So, yeah, wild sequence. I'm glad we revisited it.
I was just thinking there was that foul that somehow I got that foul with Chris Webber, who fouled out, unfortunately, so he wasn't there in the clutch. But to call a timeout, obviously. But he went up and tried to intercept that alley-oop and got knocked down, and it went out of bounds and was somehow called a defensive foul. There was that weird sequence as well.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I think we said something like, I think I messaged you like WTF, like, what?
That's when we went into instant replay. I just want to expand on the instant replay just a little bit, and I have talked about this in a Way Back Wednesday article, which you can check out on the NLSC, of course. The instant replay, the controls, they're not precise. You can't rewind to a certain point. You can't go frame by frame. Even if you go slow motion, it just goes to a certain point and stops. Same with rewind and fast forward. They've spent more time on the tape rewinding and fast forwarding effect than the actual controls. Moving the camera is a hassle. Nothing about it it's just incredibly clunky. So we went in there to check out some of these ridiculous plays when they happened, and yes, as you said, I gave up after a while because it was just trying to navigate that thing was a mess. That being said, we did have a very nice alley-oop.
No, I actually thought we had a couple plays. I almost, as a joke, put him in the top 10.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. It's so bad. There was a couple plays that we did where like I'd throw a ball fake and I threw you an alley-oop and you would throw it down and everything. But the animations are so poor and the players are just kind of launching from the court awkwardly. And the way they dunk is awkward as well, that I don't think anything really looked good that we did. Except for actually, remember that Jason Williams no-look pass I did where I dropped it off?
Yes, that was
dropped it behind me. That was probably the play of the game. That's the best, and I said that to you actually in the Twitter chat. I said that play right there is the best this game can possibly look. Like, it doesn't get any better. Maybe I'll share that highlight actually on Twitter and whatnot so people can see, what we were talking about here on the show. But I still recommend that game for collectors. And for people who like the pace of some of those older games, because it's very arcade, it's very up and down the court. And if you like great presentation and you can deal with the wonky mechanics and whatnot, hey, maybe you could have some fun with it and whatnot. So I'm not saying that it doesn't have some good aspects. It's just it's not a game that I could spend hours upon hours on. Let's put it that way.
It's fun to revisit for a laugh, as a lot of the bad, rough basketball video games are, and other games from other genres, of course. With that being said, Derek, Fox Sports NBA Basketball 2000, NBA Live 07 for Xbox 360, Kid Sports Basketball, and International Basketball 2009. Where do they rank now?
Fox Sports Basketball is the best out of all of those. That's what's wild about it, because NBA Live 07 for Xbox 360 won. They had the largest development team by far out of all of those names that you just said. Number two, they did have their hands on all of that technology, right? All of the updated technology for the time, all of the, different engine options, etc. And that game is just even worse mechanically than Fox Sports Basketball 2000. For me, I still think that NBA Live 07 for Xbox 360 is the worst out of the ones that you named. I think Fox Sports Basketball 2000 is the best. I'd say International Basketball 2009 is right behind NBA Live 07. And the reason why Kids Sports Basketball doesn't qualify in the same manner is because they weren't shooting for sim with that game.
It's
right?
It's shovelware. It's a shovelware game.
Right. It's like 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 full court, and it's these little characters who don't really move like basketball players at all, and they're not even supposed to be moving like real basketball players at all. And it's just a messy kids silly basketball game. So I can't say that one's the worst. But NBA Live 07 for 360, we've talked about it so many times before. What a mess, gameplay-wise.
I think that's a fair assessment. If nothing else, it is the most disappointing, the biggest budget from a company that has made fantastic basketball games in the past. So I definitely see the reasoning there. But speaking of a better NBA Live game, NBA Live 2004. Now, with Fox Sports Basketball, there's one dunk animation that looks good, which is the reverse dunk. It is the only dunk where they seem to actually touch the rim rather than go through it. But Live 2004, now there are some good dunks in that game.
Yeah, and you got in the top 10 this week, actually, with a Sean Kemp quick first step into a very Sean Kemp-like dunk on NBA Live 2004 where he kicks and everything. And it looked Absolutely excellent. Yeah, we had such a blast during that session, and it was nice to pull out the win in a close game. And we were using the Supersonics, and we were against the Jazz. And we've really been going to co-op lately, haven't we? Just a lot of fun playing on the same team.
It
And
has been, yeah.
the computer and make highlights. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Other than some lag spikes because you were hosting on my end, the game felt really good. It felt smooth. I could make moves. We had back-to-back dunks with Sean Kemp, which yours was the in front of the rim one hand kicking dunk, and mine was a around the rim reverse one-handed dunk, and both looked excellent. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And how about that broadcast camera mod that we were using? It brought the mod to life. It brought the game to life, all of that stuff. I just thought that was a lot of fun.
That's a fantastic mod, and I had to, as from Modman's ZZZ, his mod pack, which I've actually uploaded that, and given him credit, of course. I've uploaded that as a separate download in our downloads section. If you just want to grab that camera mod, it's there in the miscellaneous section for Live 2004. Great broadcast camera angle. Replacing, I mean, I like the default one fine. I always enjoyed playing on that, but that's definitely an improvement to that angle. And you know what? I will say that 96 mod that I made does hold up pretty well, thanks to a lot of help that I had with the art assets for that. And I also want to thank you for not bringing up my Nick Anderson moment, which I will now. I'll admit to it. I really pulled a Nick Anderson in that situation.
So Andrew almost blew the game. So this is a super close game. And Andrew went to the line twice in order to seal the game, and he went 1 for 4 on those free throws, giving us, so we only had a 2-point lead after those 2 free throw line trips, giving them a chance to win it on the other end. Luckily, we both played really good defense on the 3. They missed the 3, and I think it was Hornacek that took it. They missed the 3, and we won the game. But yeah, that was a scary moment. We didn't talk through that moment because I think you were just hoping we pulled out the win, because you would have felt pretty bad if we had lost the game after you went 1 for 4 free throws. But you played excellent throughout the rest of the game. Like, you were using Kemp incredibly well. And I thought that I also made quite a few clutch threes with Gary Payton and Hersey Hawkins during that game. A couple pretty heavily contested. And that felt good to do, actually, because I wasn't the host, right? So obviously, with you living in Australia and, having poor internet and whatnot, I'm obviously experiencing just a little bit of lag there, but I was still able to time my shots fairly well and knock down those threes. But yeah, that game still holds up incredibly well. The fun factor is still off the charts, and you can make a lot of great highlights and great plays in that game.
And the other thing about the free throws is that's one of my favorite free throw mechanics. The T-meter, that how they put the T-meter on the backboard with the square in the middle and the intersecting lines. That was one of my favorite free throw shooting mechanics in all the basketball games. And I messed it up. And I used to be able to shoot very well with that. But I haven't played that game. I haven't played 2004 to 06 PC that regularly for a while. So I'm kind of rusty with that mechanic. And again, it was one of my favorite mechanics, still is. And yet to botch those, yes, I was very grateful that we could pick up the win. But hey, remember, the mailman doesn't always deliver.
Exactly. Also, I want to point out that Andrew's first messages to me after the game ended, after we won, he goes, "Man, I almost blew it." And then his second comment was, "And that's my favorite free throw mechanic too."
Yeah.
So those are the first 2 things you said to me after. Great sessions. Really fun going from Fox Sports Basketball 2000 to NBA Live 2004. We also had a really quick session because we were testing it out on NBA Live 95 for PC. I was using a controller, but it was mapped after the mouse. So I was using X-Patter. So I was using mouse controls, but with my, Xbox One controller. And you were using keypad controls, but using them on your controller. And it worked surprisingly well using X-Patter. We even had a play where you were incredibly patient with Peyton at the top of the key, and you saw me dive in and do a face cut with Sean Kemp, and you threw an alley-oop, and I threw it down. Man, NBA Live 95 is still so much fun. And I uploaded a video of me using the Celtics versus the computer nets, and I was playing on All-Star. I uploaded a gameplay video to the NLSC YouTube, and people are loving it. And Sluggy Sports, I think it was, he was like, "Man, this game still looks so fun. And then he was inquiring about, am I playing on an emulator? Am I playing it on, the CD, etc. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad we had that quick little session, and we're going to have to play a lot more of NBA Live 95 in the near future, because that camera view on PC, the zoomed out camera view, the ISO view, my God, is that amazing. It's just an amazing view of the court, and the gameplay still holds up incredibly well.
It really does, and I'd love to play some more of Live 95 PC, just as I love 96 PC. And I did notice those comments about the camera angle, because it is still that classic camera angle, as it was called in 96, that isometric view that they introduced in Live 95. But it is more zoomed out than on console. So a lot of people were seeing that and thinking, well, what's happening with this? Because a lot of people remember the console version, either the Genesis or Super Nintendo version, but they don't necessarily remember the PC version outside our community, and a lot of those people have moved on in the years since. So I'm not sure how well known the PC version is, that people remember that it was updated for the 95 season, just as of the Clyde Drexler trade, actually, around about that time. And that's why he's coming off the bench in default rosters, because he came off the bench for his first game for the Rockets, and they just left. That's the lineups they based it on. Just one of those weird moments in time that's captured by a roster. And you know how I love my video game trivia, Derek. But yeah, having that zoomed out angle, it just looks so great. The gameplay holds up incredibly well. Obviously, it doesn't have all the sophistication of later NBA Live games, or certainly a more recent NBA 2K title as well. It's no 2K14 as far as its mechanics. But hey, look at that spin move you made with D Brown. What an incredible move to make without a spin move button.
I almost put that in the top 10 this week. It may go in next week's top 10, but there was a block on one end, and I want to say that the block was by Eric Montross, and then there was an outlet to D Brown. And then, heading up the court, I saw the defender commit to me, and I did a really quick spin with the joystick, and then another defender came over and I threw it down in traffic, a one-handed jam. My God, did that feel good. And like I said, the best part about that is there was nothing canned about it, right? And I wasn't using a spin move button. I did it with the joystick, so it felt organic and natural. So yeah, great thing to do with D Brown, especially, right? Because he was my first favorite player ever. That's where D comes from. So yeah, I might have to put that in the top 10 for next week. However, Andrew, I might want to be careful here. You know why?
Why's that?
Because we're talking up NBA Live and EA Sports. And clearly, according to one of our listeners, I'm positioning myself for a job with EA Sports, NBA Live, and hoping to be on the NBA Live team. I just wanted to address this really quick. That was a comment on the last podcast. Listen, if I wanted to position myself to work for EA Sports or work on the next NBA Live game, and they actually listened to this podcast and whatnot and saw the way I talk on the forums, I would have already talked myself out of it a long time ago. Because you know how honest I am. Isn't that right, Andrew? I'm incredibly honest. I've been incredibly critical of their marketing team, some of their past releases, how they've messed up over the last roughly, 17 years and whatnot. I've been very critical of the suits, all of that stuff. I would have talked myself out of that a long time ago. Anybody who listens to this podcast knows that I am incredibly honest, and I'm the furthest thing from a sellout, and I won't sweet talk either. So I just wanted to put that out there, because anybody who listens to me, absolutely anybody who listens to me, knows that I'm absolutely not trying to position myself for anything. But yeah, no, NBA Live 95, really fun. NBA Live 2004, that was a blast. And we even found a way to have fun with Fox Sports Basketball 2000. And if you really think about it, Andrew, we had fun with kids sports basketball.
We did.
Because I did a lot of damage with Ginger Clay. I don't know what his name is in the game. I just call him Ginger Clay.
I don't think he has one. I think his name will just be Ginger Clay from now on.
Ginger Clay. And he was absolutely dominant in that game. And for me, he's a video game legend now.
Yeah.
So.
And we do need to get those resources together to help people play these older games with DOSBox and whatnot, where you do need to use some extra steps, or the DG Voodoo N-Glide wrapper and so forth to emulate old video cards. We do want to get those resources on the site, some video tutorials, if we can put those together, and I'm sure we can. I did actually find a setting in the DOSBox configuration. DOSBox, for people who aren't aware, emulates the old DOS prompt and a DOS environment, I should say, not just the DOS prompt, because of course you have that in the run command in more recent Windows, but it is actually the DOS environment that it emulates, and you can run these old games that no longer run under a 64-bit Windows, or even older Windows as well. They are DOS games, so that's what it's useful for. There's a configuration option for joysticks, which means we won't necessarily have to use XPatter. There's also an in-game mapper, so if we want to remap the joystick and gamepads to the to keys, we can do that through DOSBox as well. So there's definitely a lot of options you can have to get modern peripherals and systems running these old games and having a blast with them.
No, I mean, how great has DOSBox been for us, and how great has Parsec been? How great has XPatter been? All these different resources that we have, application-wise, connectivity-wise, and everything. They're basically essentials if we want to play all of these old games, right, on PC, whether it be newer games, some of the newer games, or these retro games, like the mid-90s NBA Lives and whatnot, and me being able to play Lakers versus Celtics, which is, the DOS version, which came out in 1989. I love that I have a setup that I can do all this stuff with, and that you do as well, and that we can connect on these games. It's a lot of fun, and it's only beginning. Right. We have so many different things that we can still play, connect on, and share those experiences together.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. But speaking of retro basketball gaming, Derek, that is something that we obviously do a lot of. We talk about it a lot on the show. We share our highlights on the YouTube channel and on social media as well. But we've had a couple of questions about getting into it, because I think a lot of people feel that it's very expensive. And there was a comment on our last video that seemed to suggest we might be doing something a bit untowards as far as sharing games or having access that other people don't. And look, we're not incredibly wealthy, unfortunately. So it's not like we're picking up rare collectibles each and every day. And there seems to be a misconception that all old games are expensive to collect. And yes, certainly some of them are, and we'll talk about those ones that are more expensive. But Derek, there are a lot of games that were very readily available. They're still in circulation on the secondhand market. So if you want to get into retro basketball gaming, you can get in without spending a lot of money.
Well, a couple of things. A couple of weird comments about the last podcast, including the one that I spoke of earlier, by Kenny Connick. That's his name on YouTube, talking about me somehow trying to position myself for a job at EA Sports. What a ridiculous comment. It's silly. Yeah, the way we got our collections is, I don't know, just through, like, I don't know if you could call them natural ways. We order our games off of Amazon. Or we'll order them off of eBay, or we'll pick them up. Like we have a local store around my area, and it's called Bull Moose, and they have a lot of older video games in there. They even have like a Dreamcast system, the original Xbox. They have like College Hoops 2K5 out there. I picked up, I think, NBA 2K3 there at one point, etc. So we're not doing anything special, and we're getting these games for relatively low prices. For example, I just recently ordered NBA Inside Drive 2002, and I think I spent $7 on it. For NBA Live 05 PC, I want to say I spent like $15 on it or something like that. Remember, I was rounding up my PC basketball gaming collection. For the NBA Live series. I think for NBA Live 07, I might have spent $12 on it, on the PC version. So, and I ordered those off of Amazon. So we're not doing anything special. We're getting our games through Amazon, eBay, through stores in our local area, etc. So, yeah, I'm not sure where that comment came from. But, to the person that said that comment, if you tell us the games that you're looking for, I could possibly try to give you some recommendations of sites to go to
Sure.
to order them. We want to help out. In fact, both of us replied to his comment trying to help him out. And, if you want to connect on Parsec on a game that you don't own, I would love to connect with you. So if you don't own NBA Live 95 and you want to try it for the PC, yeah, you know what? Add me on Parsec, and my name on there is D for free, and I'll connect, and we can play some NBA Live 95 PC.
And you mentioned collecting organically, and a lot of my collection is games that I've been buying every single year, just getting the new game every year and just not trading in my copy, as a lot of people do when they're done with it, which is fine, and it's often how you save money for sure, but it's not how you build a collection, obviously. In the years since, I have picked up games here and there, but like you say, you go on eBay, you look for the best price, you check out the local stores that deal in retro games. Amazon, it's a bit more expensive in Australia, so I don't do as much through Amazon as you have. But that's another option as well. Anyone trying to sell games for a ridiculous price, because we did get a comment about how to get digital downloads of NBA Live, and yes, those are unavailable. A lot of games that were available digitally are no longer available that way. You do need to get the physical copy if indeed they exist. So yes, that is an issue. As you said in the last show, Derek, if you do need to get an optical drive, you can get an external USB optical drive if you don't have one in your PC, your laptop, or your desktop. They're not as common as they used to be. Often you have to get it custom built and specifically say, I want an optical drive in it so I can retro game or indeed listen to CDs, watch DVDs or Blu-ray, whatever. But you definitely need to shop around. And this is a problem with retro gaming and collecting in general, which a lot of people think old equals rare equals expensive. And just as not everything is an antique, not everything is a rare collectible. You look at a lot of the basketball cards that we collected in the 90s, Derek, and they were so mass-produced, so many of them, that we thought, these are going to be worth something in the future, but because there's so many of them, they're not. Some of the inserts definitely are more expensive, and as the collector's market comes back again and it fluctuates, you can make some money off some of those cards, for sure, but they're not all valuable. And the same goes with basketball video games. The ones that were coming out every single year, your NBA Lives, your NBA 2Ks, for many years there, that were readily available, and it is a bit cheaper on console. I have found that some of the PC versions, physical copies of PC versions, can be more expensive at times. It's certainly more expensive if you're collecting complete in box. If you just want to play the game, I've collected a lot of the games in my collection are not complete in box, or they're just the jewel case, don't necessarily have a manual. But I just wanted the games to play. I just wanted the working games in my collection. And if you stick to that, you can save a lot of money. And just look for those bargains. Anyone who's trying to gouge you for a common game and trying to charge $300 or even $100 for a game that was very readily available, where there's plenty of copies in circulation, don't deal with them. If you're getting an old Live or 2K, in that $10 to $20 range is really, or less, is really what you should be looking at. Again, depends whether it's complete in box. And some of the PC versions are a bit rarer than others, but definitely don't be spending hundreds of dollars on it. Those people are definitely trying to rip you off.
Yeah, so first about the external CD drive thing. It's like $20. I picked it up at Best Buy for $20. I know that there's plenty of them between $18 and $25, and of course I'm talking about US. Because that's what I see when I log onto the website and whatnot. $18 and $25 for an external the CD drive that plugs in USB and it operates just like a regular CD-ROM drive. That's how I've installed all of these games. NBA Live 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. All of these games I've installed them using that external CD drive because I don't have an internal one for my desktop. The other thing too is, I've had some people say, people reach out to me via DM on Twitter asking me how to get NBA 2K11, like a digital download of it. I was fortunate. So when I got NBA 2K11, Amazon was selling the digital download. So you would buy 2K11 from Amazon and they would send you the game's code and the download link, and then you download the game. So like they'd basically send you an executable. And then so now I can play NBA 2K11, even though I don't have a physical disc for it. That since then they've taken that off of Amazon, but you can still get NBA 2K11 for PC, search for it online, search for it on eBay, etc. Get your hands on the disc. And if you don't have a CD drive, use the external CD drive, or use your internal one if you have it, and you can still get your hands on that game and install it. So there's definitely workarounds. And just to let you know, like, I have all of these games installed and working on my Windows 10 PC. I did notice that there was somebody that commented and said they couldn't get NBA Live 07 for PC to work on Windows 10. And the only thing I'll say to that person is it's very possible that you have to run it in compatibility mode, maybe with like Windows Vista or something like that, or Windows XP, a different OS. And so you can give that a try. Also make sure that, and this happens with a lot of the mid-2000s lives, make sure that the game isn't hanging in your task manager. So go to your processes and whatnot, and try to make sure that there's no NBA Live 07 executable, or maybe an older live, like if you were playing NBA Live 05 for PC, make sure that's still not hanging there, because that will prevent NBA Live 07 from
exactly. It doesn't always stop the process for those mid-2000s lives. If that's a little bit too technical for you, I've also got what I've just labeled NBA Live 2005, 06, 07, and 08 task killers in the download section. Just a batch file, you download that, leave it on your desktop. After you finish playing those games, just run that, and if it will kill the task, automatically it'll end that task if it's still running. So that's also a shortcut that you can use.
Right. And I also want to point this out. So Andrew and I have amassed an incredibly large basketball video game collection. And he lives in Australia. I live on the opposite side of the world, an hour outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S., and we're both getting our hands on these games pretty easily. I think you would agree.
Very cheaply, yeah. I may have spent a bit more on some games because of the exchange rate, but as I said, the most expensive game I think I've bought is College Hoops 2K8, and I did spend a little bit more. I did budget for that, including postage, of course, to Australia, probably around about $100 Australian. That is a rarer game. That was not complete in box. So again, this is how you can save money on those games if you don't want to be a collector. If you just want to be a retro gamer and not somebody who's collecting boxes to put on a shelf or later flip as a full collection to make money. If you're not investing in it, if you're just investing in it for monetary gain, if you're investing in it for enjoyment, just go for the games, a working copy of the game.
Right. For example, if you go on Amazon and you find a title that you want, I'm just going to use an example here. Let's say you heard us talk about NBA Inside Drive and you want to get the one that was their last release. So you want to get NBA Inside Drive 2004. There are options to choose from. There's new, if there is a new version available, if somebody's giving you like a new fully in-box sealed version of NBA Inside Drive 2004. There's used, good, used, acceptable, etc. And it will tell you in the description whether it has the manual or if it has the jewel case or if it has like the original packaging, all of that stuff. And if you want that game, go for the one that's used good or used acceptable, and get the one that, if it says it has the manual and you want the manual, do that. And if it has a jewel case, good, that's great. But you can get these games sometimes for like $7, right? $8, $10, at most $15 sometimes for some of these older titles. And so, yeah, I'm not sure where he's coming from. I think he mentioned hundreds of dollars to try to get his hands on the games that we were discussing. And I mean, I didn't even spend $20, right?
I mean, it depends where he's in the world, I suppose.
It does depend. You're right. It depends on where he is in the world, but we'd like to talk to you more about it. So you could reply to our comments on YouTube. Like I said, no matter where you are in the world, if you want to try to connect with me on Parsec, I'd love to play these games with you as well. But yeah, I mean, my best recommendation is to use your resources. Go on eBay, go on Amazon, go on these different websites, and hit up the stores in your local area if there are any. And you might be surprised at what you can find.
And be a savvy consumer. For the same reason we say hold off on pre-ordering a new game until you see whether you like it or see what other people's opinions who you trust, what they have to say about the game. Be a savvy consumer when it comes to retro gaming and collecting. And definitely don't overpay. Be aware that some sellers will try and inflate the price because they do believe, oh, it's old, so people will think it's vintage, and everything vintage is expensive and a rare collectible. No, it's not. So definitely be savvy. Look around at the general prices of a game and see who's trying to be. There's a thing called eBay prices in the secondhand market where some people will try and gouge you or get the most that they can. It's going to be different price to trade-ins at a video game store or the prices that you'll pay there sometimes, because the common sports games, the ones that were annual releases, and there are a lot of copies out there in the wild, they shouldn't cost a lot because they're not as in high demand as other games that were much rarer or indeed much more popular. And we're also coming at this with a collector's mentality as well. You and I, Derek, we're crazy collectors. We love having these big collections. Not everybody has to do that if they don't want to. If you just want to play an old favorite, just shop around for that old favorite, or pick up a couple of old favorites that you'd like to make part of your retro gaming rotation. There's no need to do a complete collection if you don't want to be a collector. You can just pick and choose those games that you had a lot of fun with back in the day, get them back in your collection, get them working again on your current hardware, or if you do need to pick up an old console, shop around again with retro gaming stores and whatnot. So yeah, just focus on what you want to play.
Trust me when I say that Andrew and I are very aware that we're in the minority here. Like, there's not many Andrew and I's as far as like our collecting habits and how many basketball video games we have and everything. And, our goals when it comes to basketball gaming, we very much know that we're not the average person. So yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I also want to make another point, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of this because, people are messaging me, asking me about 2K11, etc. Somebody had asked me about 2K9 as well. I don't know if people understand. It's not illegal to buy Steam keys for these games from reputable sellers in order to plug the Steam code into your Steam dashboard and for the game to pop up as a playable game, right? So like NBA 2K11, from my understanding, still has sellers out there. I know I saw some from Europe, but also I believe there's some Steam keys out there to buy for the US. So if you don't want to get like the disc version, search for like NBA 2K11 Steam keys or NBA 2K9 Steam keys and whatnot, and exhaust that option because you might be able to find one from a reputable seller, plug that into your Steam dashboard, and then be able to launch the game and play the game right through Steam.
And to that point, also with those resellers, some of them are more reputable than others, as you noted there. So if you're not sure and you do find that key, you might also want to do a bit of Googling about that reseller as well to see what other people are saying about their experiences with them on the grey market
100%.
there.
Yeah, I was about to say, 100%. Some of them are very good. Some of them are super sketchy. The way I ended up getting NBA Playgrounds, the original, to work on Steam, to be able to get that game. Because remember, when NBA Playgrounds 2 came out, they basically acted like the original NBA Playgrounds didn't exist. They took it off of the Steam marketplace. There was really no way for you to get your hands on it. Well, somebody on eBay was selling I think I spent, just a few bucks on it, was selling the Steam code to be able to play NBA Playgrounds. And this was a reputable seller. And so I bought that code from him. I plugged it into Steam and boom, was able to get NBA Playgrounds on there. And my brother and I beat the game. We had a lot of fun with it. So exhaust all your options when it comes to this stuff because there's a lot of options out there.
And we'll have some more articles about that, some more videos about also getting these old games to run, but some more collecting guides. We can definitely do that. If people would like to hear more, we can circle back to it on future podcasts, but definitely do other content as well, articles, videos, etc., that will help people collect. Because I do think that retro basketball gaming is filling a niche. It's filling a gap in the market that's not being filled by competition currently. There's more interest in it as people are experiencing that 2K fatigue. So I think people are definitely interested in getting into some of these old games, especially when you've got some content creators like us showing the games off and how fun they can be. And when you see them in the top 10 every week and the other highlights we share, there's obviously interest there. So we want to help people out. We're not super wealthy. We're not special in that regard. We've just been we've built up our collections over the years by holding on to the games as we've bought them new, and we've also sought out other deals through eBay and Amazon and local retro gaming stores and whatnot, and that's the way to go, to be a savvy consumer, but we'll definitely work on those resources as well. But on the subject of retro gaming, Derek, I posed the question last week, what constitutes retro? What do you think retro is? And you threw that question out to our listeners as well on social media. What qualifies as retro to you? What are the most recent basketball video games that you consider retro? And how long you've been playing basketball video games? Once again, we got a lot of great responses, which we'll be getting to in the mailbag. But before we get to that, I did want to follow up with some further opinions of my own. And I've been thinking about it, and I think that anything that's at least 2 generations old is what you could call a modern definition of retro. I think there's a classic definition of retro, which is kind of 16-bit and earlier, or maybe early 3D era and earlier. That's your classic retro, Atari, early Nintendo, those consoles that are over 25 years old. And then you've got that more modern definition, that looser definition of a retro, which is at least 2 generations old. So if you look at my 2K14 kick, for example, I could differentiate between that being retro gaming and playing an old game, because that's from the PS4 X1 generation, which is still being released for. It's still being supported, and it's an old game. I think it's on the border of retro at the very least, but it's kind of there. It's retro gaming in a sense, but you've kind of got that really retro gaming, and then you've got playing an old game. They're all fun, don't get me wrong. That's what it comes down to. But if I had to define it, I think that's how I would.
It's interesting because I have a slightly different take on it. So retro for me, I've always thought of Atari, NES, Super NES, Sega Genesis. Like that for me is what I consider like retro gaming now. As far as newer, so like if I say like PlayStation, Dreamcast, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, all that stuff, I consider that classic. So like when we talk about those games in my apartment and whatnot, and if this has come up before actually, this conversation, what is retro and everything, I'll call the games from the Atari, NES, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo era, I'll call those retro, but I usually refer to the games from PlayStation 1 moving forward as classic. And then as far as Xbox 360 and whatnot, it's very hard for me to refer to those as classic games, right? Because some of those Xbox 360 and PS3 titles still hold up incredibly well today. For example, Skyrim, right? So Skyrim is a PS3 gen title, and that game looks ridiculously good. How could I possibly refer to that game as a classic, like a classic game
or retro? Yeah,
right, exactly. So my opinion is anything before Xbox 360 and the PS3 era is classic up to the point of Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, NES, and Atari. That's what I would consider retro.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of defining it, both having retro gaming and classic gaming. But then to that point, what would you call kind of Xbox 360 through to maybe 2K14, 2K15?
I'm not sure if I would, like if I'm playing NBA 2K9, I'm not going to say, man, I'm playing a classic. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't, I don't consider that like a super like classic or retro game. I'm not sure. I'd have to think of the term.
Would it also be fair to say that it's also relative to one's childhood? Because 2K8, 2K9 coming out when we're in our mid-20s, for example, as opposed to 16-bit era and 8-bit era, and of course Atari coming out before we were even born, or in television, those early consoles, ColecoVision, whatever. Is it kind of relative to one's childhood? Well,
I brought that up on the last show, if you remember correctly. I said, I was talking about how an 18-year-old today could consider something like NBA 2K14 classic for them, right?
Yes.
Because that could be their first basketball video game title. And they could have, that's just the way they could feel about it. So, yeah, I think age definitely has something to do with it, which actually corresponds with the answers that were given to this mailbag question, because you can tell that some of the answers were given based on that person's age and their experience with these games. Even one of the comments was based on the first game they ever played. So on the first console they ever played, so they consider that retro, etc. So yeah, no, I definitely think that plays a factor.
And I suppose also, depending on your definition of retro, everything becomes retro or classic in a way at a certain point. Certainly everything gets old.
Oh yeah, 100%. At some point, we're going to be 10, 15 years in the future or whatever. And, for me, games like NBA 2K11, 2K9 and everything, I'll consider those as classics, right?
They'll be vintage, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the other word, vintage, right? What do you consider vintage?
Yeah, that would definitely be the early days of basketball gaming. Your double dribbles, your World League basketball, probably at the latest. Certainly no further than 16-bit.
Yeah, vintage isn't used that much.
No.
Actually, or often when it comes to talking about basketball video games. Retro is the common word.
It's
that's
cool.
used.
It sounds cooler. Vintage
100%.
Vintage sounds old. Well, that being said, our section in the forum for everything before NBA Live 2003 is called NBA Live Vintage, because we switched to the new forum in 2002. We couldn't bring over all the old boards. So knowing that people weren't going to be talking about those games as much, that is the NBA Live Vintage board. But that being said, retro is definitely popular.
Yeah, we definitely got quite a few responses too, and almost immediately when I put the mailbag prompt out. So thank you to all of our listeners who responded to the mailbag.
It is indeed time to open up the mailbag.
To the mailman, the pump fake. What an unbelievable dunk!
So the question I posed to the community was, basketball gamers, what qualifies as retro to you? What are the most recent basketball video games that you consider retro? And how long have you been playing basketball video games?
And first up, we have Relhouse at _Relhouse on Twitter. Shout out to you as always. Classic retro, I consider Arch Rivals. And that's certainly throwing it back with a great game there, the precursor to NBA Jam by Midway. I have played Arch Rivals. I actually have the arcade version through Midway's Arcade Treasures, a compilation of emulated games that they released on PC, and I believe it's also on console, that collection as well. I think that's the first time I played Arch Rivals was through that collection, the arcade version, and yeah, that is definitely retro.
No, 100%. That kind of goes along with what I said, right? I mean, I included Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, which I even question including those myself as retro. I'd almost even consider those classic. The NES era and whatnot is absolutely retro. I don't think that can be argued. That started in like the mid 80s and whatnot. So yeah, Arch Rivals, absolutely retro.
Next up, we have another Derek at Chuckboy Thunder on Twitter. Started off with NBA Live 2000. That's where my love of basketball video games started off for me. I consider early 2000s gaming retro because in case I get bored of playing new games nowadays, because it won't hold my interest sometimes. NBA Live 2000 is a fantastic introduction to basketball gaming, I'll just say. I mean, it was exciting for me going through those early NBA Lives and then being blown away by NBA Live 2000. But if that was your introduction to basketball gaming, that would definitely get you hooked on basketball gaming, I would imagine, and certainly more than Fox Sports NBA Basketball 2000.
Yeah, what a great start, right?
Yeah.
The presentation on NBA Live 2000 is excellent. Love the gameplay. I've been playing a ton of NBA Live 2000 for the PC. Lately, as you know, we're over 30 games into a season. My brother and I playing co-op using Legends and whatnot. So that goes back to our point, right? What he considers retro is his first experiences with basketball video games. And you know damn well that if he, let's say his first experiences with basketball video games was with, I don't know, Bulls versus Blazers, he would probably consider that retro, right? Or that era of basketball games retro instead. So it definitely factors in. I would be curious to see when he said early 2000s basketball games. So my guess is that he's probably, talking about all the way up until we went to PS3, Xbox 360. So basically what I would consider classic, he would consider retro. So that's kind of cool.
And next up is Chuck at ChuckLA92 on Twitter. Double Dribble on NES was my first game. A friend lent it to me in exchange for RC Pro-Am. Fell in love with it and eventually got my own copy. And then says, anything before 2K14, are considered retro. So there you have a looser definition of retro, kind of more along the lines of what I've been saying, where a couple of generations back could be considered retro in its own right.
Yeah, I think he leans a little bit more with your philosophy around it. I want to say that, Chuck, you and I have something in common. Double Dribble was also my first basketball video game ever. And we spent so much time on that game. And honestly, it's still fun today. Andrew and I revisited it on Parsec.
Yes.
Actually. And despite Andrew missing the most dunks I've ever seen in a basketball video game, we still had like a lot of fun with that game. It still holds up gameplay wise. Remember how I talked about how important pace is? The pace on Double Dribble is excellent. And you can have true competition on it because of the steal mechanics and whatnot. So I think that's an incredibly loose definition for retro, but there's no rights and wrongs here, right? So that's perfectly fine if that's how you look at basketball video games and retro.
And an interesting take here from Scorpion Soldier Gaming at CG_CAD50 on Twitter. I'm calling NBA Live 19 retro. I felt like since it's the cool thing to do in this generation to make fun of NBA Live. Live 18 and Live 19 especially had their own unique feel to them, and not a lot of people I feel got to enjoy it, or even give it a chance for what it was. Then goes on to say, 2K3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be my favourite stretch of classics, just because they have the college hoops variants to go alongside for the ultimate package. And that's definitely an interesting take. What he says about 2K definitely lines up with your definition of classics. But yeah, the idea of Live 19 being retro is certainly interesting.
Hell, I mean, it feels like it's been forever since they came out with a basketball game, right?
Sure.
I don't blame him for actually saying that. Yeah, I mean, I obviously wouldn't consider NBA Live 19 or Live 18 retro, but I kind of get his reasoning behind it. He also sounds a little frustrated that we haven't gotten one over the last few years. And again, I don't blame him there because I think a lot of people are who are fans of, basketball games in general and just wants us to have options and everything. And yeah, obviously classics, 2K3, 2K2, etc. I love the Dreamcast era and the PlayStation 2 and Xbox era. And I think you do as well. I just love that era of basketball video games and gaming in general.
Definitely a lot of nostalgia there. Absolutely. And PC ports of that generation as well, obviously. It also speaks to another point that I was mulling over when I was considering my answer for this, which is if the game no longer has online support, if it's no longer supported by the developer, can it count as retro or old school? But if you're going to say that, then 2K17 technically is retro or classic, and I'm not sure it's there yet. And of course, then you've got a situation where Live 19 is supported, still has online support, but 2K19 doesn't. So I was originally going for that definition, but then thought, no, then there's too much inconsistency there, so I discarded that. But yeah, it's been a while since NBA Live came out, so it's in a way it's starting to feel retro.
I mean, what would you consider old school? I mean, that's another term. That's more terminology that people use sometimes to talk about basketball in general, like the NBA, but also basketball video games. When I think of old school,
80s and 90s. 80s and 90s for me. 80s and 90s.
I think I would agree. I think old school would be considered 80s and 90s, even when it comes to basketball video games, right? But anything after 2000, I don't think I could ever consider it old school.
Certainly anything after PS2, original Xbox era, I don't think. I mean, that'd be pushing it. But I think 80s and 90s is kind of my old school definition.
I would agree.
Next up, we have Samuel, modder, of course, in the community. Shout out to you at EasyMadden25 on Twitter. Been playing since 2K5. I now consider anything before 2K10 to be retro. And again, that speaks to when you start out and kind of that nostalgia of what counts as your childhood.
Right, 100%. I mean, if you're playing games when you're like 8 to 10 years old, I always use that as the example because I think that's when people really start like getting into them now.
Yeah,
like
agreed.
And whatnot, being able to understand kind of what's going on the court and being able to be good on the sticks and everything. I would say that, if you're playing a game from those ages from 8 to 10, and then, 8 to 10 years later, you're, in your late teens or, pushing, getting into your 20s and whatnot, that's going to seem like forever ago, right? So that makes perfect sense, his definition, and good stuff.
Next up, we have B4-3 at B4-3 on Twitter. Live.
How have I not B4-3? How have I not blocked B4-3, Andrew? I mean, it is so close to D4-3. He's even using the number 4. You're killing me, B4-3.
Killing me, Smalls. Well, there's a throwback for you. There's an old school reference. The Sandlot. Live 97 as my first NBA game. Before that, I played basketball on the Atari 2600. Yes, now that is very retro. To me, retro is every game on an older generation of consoles than the current one. So that's a looser definition again, that PS4 and X1 is obviously a superseded generation at this point. So considering that retro. For me, I think it needs to be at least two generations ago, because they are still supporting PS4 and X1. But I can also see that definition of anything beyond the current, anything that is not current generation or next gen is prior gen, if you will, last generation. So I see that point as well.
That is an incredibly loose definition for retro and what would be considered retro. But again, there's no right and wrong here. Yeah, I couldn't do that. That's, for me, when I think of retro, I think of VCRs,
yeah,
VHS,
CRT,
CRTs, tube TVs, me hunched over in front of my, 19-inch tube TV, playing NBA Jam, right? Like, that's what I think of with retro. I don't think of me sitting in the comfort of my couch with my souped up computer in front of me playing on a 50-inch TV plugged in through HDMI with just a plethora of modes in a video game and all of this customization and how I can mod these games and make players look like they do in real life and all of that stuff. Like, I could never consider those two different dynamics and those two different experiences the same. You know what I mean? Like, I can't use the same, like, I can't use retro for both of those experiences.
Sure.
So there's definitely a different definition there.
Stephen Hansen, at Stephen Hansen48 on Twitter, I would say it depends. The NBA Live and 2K games all the way back to the Xbox PS2 gen still feel like their modern counterparts. But you ask about the NBA Street Series that feels retro since we haven't had any updates since 3. Well, we have had Home Court, although that's not as popular as the other ones. But I see the point there, that if you've got a game that's still kind of been released recently, it's harder to feel retro, I believe is what he's getting at here. Whereas the Street Series, which has been dormant for much longer, now feels retro. And I see that as well.
That's probably my favorite response, not to play favorites here, but it's probably my favorite overall response, because he's not entirely wrong about the gameplay. Like his reference of saying that the game, might have a lot of the same mechanics, now, or very similar mechanics now than they did, for that series back on the Xbox days or the PS2 days and whatnot, because you can go back and play like ESPN NBA 2K5, etc., and you can still see that is 2K, right? Like it feels like similar 2K gameplay overall and look to much of the recent NBA.
Yeah, the mechanics, the style, and everything resemble a modern game.
Right, exactly, right. So, no, I definitely see where he's coming from, and I like that he had that thought process.
Our friend King J Mace, at King J Mace on Twitter, of course. NBA Live 2002 was TV franchise on the cover. PS1 days, every day after kindergarten, had to play. And NBA Live 2002 is a game. Also, this makes me feel old because that is the game that came out as I was finishing high school. So that is the game that I was entering my final year in high school. So that's what I associate with a transitional period in life, and getting ready to go out into the adult world, such as it was, and those memories of high school. And of course, I got my 20-year high school reunion coming up later this year, in a couple of months actually. Maybe I'll play some Live 2002, really get me in the mood. But it's a game that I enjoyed at the time. I do have my criticisms of of some of the Arcadia moments and the backboard shaking as much as it does is a bit exaggerated. We've talked about this before with Live 2002, Derek. That adds charm, even if it wasn't totally to my simhead tastes. But Live 2002, I think a pretty strong introduction to gaming as well. And certainly, yes, again, that's the game that gets you into basketball. That is retro to you.
Yeah, I mean, NBA Live 2002, it sounds like he was playing the PS1 version because he said PS1 days. I spent most of my time with the PS2 version.
Same.
NBA Live 2002, and I shared a Steve Francis highlight under his tweet, which he appreciated, which was the drive and under the leg throwdown. And I just think that's an awesome highlight. And I know he appreciated that. But, yeah, I mean, NBA Live 2002 may not be my favorite NBA Live, but I can definitely still have fun with it. And actually, me and Nate Stasio, NBA Live 2001 legend, connected on Parsec, if you remember correctly, and we played a game between, I want to say it was the Kings and the Lakers, me the Lakers and him the Kings. And it was really fun to play head to head. I don't have as much fun playing that game against the computer, but when I'm playing it against another human, I have an absolute blast a lot of the time. Speaking of which, just to let you know, I think it was Roger that told me him and Nate have actually been spending a lot of time recently on NBA Live 2004. And they said that they've been having a lot of fun on that. So it's nice to see them, switch it up from time to time and, not just stick with NBA Live 2001 and enjoy some of those other early NBA Live titles.
Definitely, but I mean, I'm not going to make fun of anybody for sticking with a favorite, because how many times have you connected with me or say, let's connect, and I've said, oh, let's play this game we've played umpteen times before. So I'm a creature of habit, so I'm definitely not going to. I have no high horse to get on here as far as playing the same game for years on end. We should connect with them and play some 2-on-2 with the 96 mod.
We still got to do that. And I'm the same way, by the way. NBA 2K17, that game came out in 2016, and every single week, my oldest brother, Mark, comes over, and me, Mark, and Nick either play against each other or on the same team on NBA 2K17. It is every week, and it's been that way for, coming up on 6 years now. So sticking with a favorite that you really enjoy, absolutely perfectly fine to do. We still have so much fun with that game, and the point is to have fun, right? So if we're having fun, why would we switch?
Next up is Leader of the Foot Clan at aka_Chuck_Cross on Twitter. Speaking of which, Derek, I did actually pick up Shredder's Revenge on Steam, and also there is the Cowabunga collection coming out in August with all the classic Ninja Turtles games. So speaking of the Foot Clan, that is, obviously. So there'll be a lot of Heroes in a Half Shell action going on.
How do you like it? Have you tried it?
I haven't actually played it yet. I've only just picked it up and installed it, but I'm going to get into it, and I might have to come back next week with a couple of quick non-basketball gaming impressions there.
Also, before the next show, people, you've heard us talk about Garfield Kart multiple times on this show.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to get Andrew to play it. We're going to connect on Parsec, and Andrew and I are going to have a session on Garfield Kart, and we'll report back on its greatness. We'll let you know if it's life-changing, like everybody on Steam was saying. We'll let you know if it gave me a 48-inch vertical. We'll have a session, and it should be fun.
We should compare Parsec versus in-game online, just as we did with live.
Does that game have like regular online connectivity?
I think it might.
Questioning this, it might be the greatest video game of all time.
Well, it would be life-changing.
Right, exactly.
But with that being said, back to Leader of the Foot Clan's comment. The first basketball video game I played was Basketball for Atari. Again, another Basketball for Atari player there. Again, very retro. And of course, I haven't actually played that one, but I have played NBA Basketball for Intellivision. I connect with you on that one, although we played the PS2 emulator version in the Intellivision Lives collection. But those early basketball games, you really had to use your imagination.
Who could forget my amazing block on the Intellivision version NBA basketball? I almost put that in the top 10. Nate didn't agree. He was like, I don't think that's top 10, but I thought it was. It was like one of those blocks. Yeah, what a hater. Ridiculous. Just kidding. I didn't put it in the top 10 for a reason, Nate. I didn't think it was top 10 either. Yeah. No, I like I said, retro, NES days and prior, absolutely.
And jumping over to Instagram for a couple of the responses here, JC3 Gaming LLC. Sports games feel retro quick. Playing NBA 2K18 feels like stepping back into a time machine now. Anything pre-HD is absolutely retro. Something as current as NCAA Football 14 is a retro game. Almost a decade old, and you need old hardware to play it. And reading that comment, Derek, I was thinking, anything that it could be argued that anything where you have to go to the trouble of setting up a modern machine to run a modern PC, for example, to run an old game or to pull out old hardware to play, I guess is retro or classic in its own way.
Yeah, I guess. I like I said, I can't. That's not my definition. Like NBA 2K18 is another game that it's a PS4 gen game. It's a game. It's a game that also has it's the same motion system that's being used, or a lot of that motion system is still being used in NBA 2K22, right? And I fully expect it to be in there in a way, with as far as like the lack of foot planning and everything. I expect that to be in NBA 2K23 as well. So while I don't agree with him, I do see where he's coming from. I think the conclusion is, Andrew, is that we need to get a collective agreement on what's retro and classic and then change the full definitions in the dictionary. How about that?
Of course. It should be up to us entirely, no doubt. But
yeah, exactly. Wait, are we even taking the input now, or just your and my definitions? We'll agree on something. How about that?
Well, apparently we don't like opposing opinions, so clearly we're horrible people who will just rewrite the dictionary.
Yeah, nasty comments sometimes. Nasty comments.
Yeah. Well, what are you going to do? Welcome to the internet, I suppose. But no, I do see the point about the using old hardware, or certainly games from the mid 2000s, early 2000s as well. How you could define those as retro. We've been playing those on PC, but we've had to use those workarounds, the N-Glide wrappers or DOSBox from games from a few years before that. So if you have to go to some extra steps to get them working on modern hardware, or again have to pull out an old console to play them, then I can see that being a retro. I'd be inclined to agree with that. That's kind of lines up with my definition as well. I would say 2K18 is far too new for me, but I do see the point.
I keep thinking back. What I consider retro. I keep thinking back to me holding an NES controller, with 2 buttons, and with a B and A button, and then the start and select, and then just my arrows. Like I said, huddled up in front of a small screen, and looking at the primitive graphics, having a blast. Not even thinking about the graphics at the time, but just having a blast with those games. And then I think about the way I play the games now, right? The bigger screen, the newer hardware, the updated graphics, all of that stuff, my wireless controller and everything. And like I said, I just can't connect those two by the same word, because they're just, for me, while they're still both fun experiences, just there's so many differences as well.
Meanwhile, there's an even older person listening to this podcast saying, you think that's retro? I played Magnavox Odyssey. I played pinball. Retro gaming.
Hey, what's wrong with pinball? I feel like great. Let me put this out there. I feel like so many people back then had a pinball machine in their home, in their basement, or something like that. I had multiple family members, grandparents on both sides and everything, that had like a pinball machine that you could actually like physically use, etc. So I'm not even talking about like the old games, like the little ping pong games or anything like that on, Atari or older, etc. I'm talking about like physical pinball machines. Absolutely, I feel like that was a really big thing back then, and it was like a party game and all of that stuff. And it was like almost like a elevated living or something like that. No, by the way, there wasn't a lot of money in my family. That's not what I'm saying. There absolutely was not. We were not a rich family, etc. But pinball machines were pretty fun back then, and I think they were pretty common.
Did you ever play Epic Pinball back in the day?
I didn't. Actually, you know what I had that I spent a lot of time on? Do you remember the NES game Rockin' Ball?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that game was really popular in my house, so we played that. So that's a version of pinball. And then, you know what games were really popular too for like a stretch were like those like pool games and whatnot, yes. Whether they be PC games for pool, console games for pool, etc. So I definitely played quite a few of those as well. But yeah, Rockin' Ball was my video game version of pinball, basically.
Epic Pinball is still available on GOG.com, Good Old Games. If people want to check that out, it's pretty inexpensive. And I'm not getting paid to say that. I just really like that game if you want to check it out. Again, there are ways of getting these old games cheap and legally. So
Andrew loves money. So if you want to pay him so he talks about it more,
oh sure,
whoever out there, he will absolutely talk about it more.
And speaking of selling out, if you need a VPN to set a screen on your computer, no, I'm not going to go there. But that's the kind of professionalism that I will bring to your ad reads. But finally,
the moral of the story is every man has his price, right, Andrew?
Like Ted DiBiase said in the 80s, every man has his price. Absolutely. Finally, we have from Instagram, No Context Spurs NBA, anything older than 2K5. Which again kind of gels with my definition, and certainly you're going back multiple generations there as well.
There you go. Yeah, that ties into my retro classic definition, right? So yeah, no, that's good stuff.
But again, very interesting to hear people's different takes on what constitutes retro. Sometimes it is relative to childhood or entering into basketball gaming, going by console generations, certain number of console generations, years, whatever. But the important thing is that these games are still playable. A lot of them so fun to revisit, and even the bad ones can be funny to revisit once in a while just for a laugh. Fox Sports NBA Basketball 2000, we're looking at you. But yeah, thank you so much for those responses. It's really cool, Derek, that we're not the only ones. We may be weird. We may be weird with our collecting habits, but we're not the only ones who enjoy retro basketball gaming, or indeed playing old basketball games, vintage games, classic games, whatever you want to call them. They are a blast.
Yeah, shout out to Kid Cash 202 as well, who really enjoys the classic video game content that we produce here at the NLSC. I mean, he was really quick to comment on NBA Live 95 PC. You're talking about, can we get more footage of this? I never played this back in the day, all of that stuff. So that's part of the reason why I uploaded that NBA Live 95 gameplay video to YouTube, to the NLSC YouTube, excuse me. So Kid Cash could see it, and anybody else who hadn't seen the PC version of that game. So yeah, thank you to all of our listeners who continually, participate in the mailbag, listen to the show, provide input, participate in the, NLSC top 10 plays of the week, comment on Andrew's articles, all of that stuff. So, thank you to the community.
And we will keep that content coming, of course, and put out a new mailbag prompt each and every week. But for the moment, that has brought us to the end of episode number 436 of the NLSC Podcast. We thank you for joining us. Once again, the podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, as well as all the major podcatching apps and our YouTube channel. And as we wrap up here, we'd like to invite you to connect with us on social media. So, Derek, I'll throw it over to you to share your handles.
Oh, absolutely. You can connect with me on Twitter, where I'm the most active at D4 384, or my other handle, D for 3G. You can also connect with me on the NLSC, D for 3, and on YouTube, D for 3.
I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. Our Instagram is NLSC Basketball. Our aforementioned YouTube channel is youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-Live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. But yes, that's all for this week, so thank you once again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.